On Friday, November 30th, at the Grand Summit Resort at Mount Snow in Dover, the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation's Southern Vermont Economy Project organized a conference on the state of internet connectivity and broadband access in Vermont. The state of such access varies greatly across the state, from robust in major urban areas like Burlington to something far less than that in the more rural and thinly populated parts of the state. In those rural areas, the lack of potential customers sometimes translates into a reluctance on the part of cable companies and other internet service providers to build the basic infrastructure the internet depends upon. But today, economic development and the jobs, revenue, and benefits that flow from that increasingly rely not just on basic broadband or wireless service, but service which offers ever faster upload and download speeds. Many jobs today increasingly seek workers who can work remotely, either from home or from an office where they are communicating with colleagues and business partners far away. So the future of the state's economic well-being will continue to rely on its towns across the state being able to offer residents at least good enough internet connectivity. But it's not just about economic development. Increasingly, homework assignments for students in schools rely on internet access, as does healthcare. The conference looked at case studies from around the state and explored other challenges to expanding broadband and internet service to underserved parts of the state, and asked participants to help craft a survey that the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation hopes to distribute to assess need and how much is affordable. The Credit Corporation is partnering with the Bennington County Regional Commission, as well as other Bennington County business groups, to boost the economy of the entire southern Vermont region. And we had a chance to talk with Matt Harrington, the executive director of the Bennington Area Chamber of Commerce, about broadband and internet issues.
Well, I think you've heard time and time again at this conference just the funding and the ability to do it. So I think everybody thinks it's a great idea. No one thinks it's a bad idea. It's the funding to do it. And we were just in a legislative luncheon yesterday talking about that very issue. And I think the conclusion was it would take multiple millions of dollars to even begin the process over a span of a long time for the state of Vermont government to be doing all of it. So, like Vermonters, like our generations before us, I think we have to get scrappy and build it from the bottom up. One person shared a great idea yesterday at the luncheon, and I brought it up today in the conference was, could there be resources, could there be grants, could there be funding for people trying to sell their homes and trying to kind of retrofit their house for Wi-Fi, and that might help some of the last mile of what we're trying to do. So it's not about the government coming and just putting a bunch of fiber throughout Vermont, which hopefully they do, but I think not waiting for that and getting creative with if we were to give realtors or homeowners some extra money to implement that. And that was just one idea. I think there's plenty of other ideas, but Vermont's scrappy, Vermont's entrepreneurial, so I think we have to find the solution ourselves, and this conference is very much talking about that. And I think while we're contemplating what we're doing, we have to know that there are adjacent and other adjacent states next to us doing the same thing. So we're kind of in a fight to not be the first, but we definitely don't want to be the last. And I think it's going to be, as it has been from a lot of other things, partnership between private and public.
Trying to expand broadband coverage across the state has been a long-term problem, which governors since Jim Douglas have sought to achieve. But there's still a long way to go. The Federal Communications Commission defines broadband as roughly 25 megabits per second of download speed. By that yardstick, there are more than 63,000 addresses around the state, out of more than 300,000, that lack such access. And of those 63,000 addresses, some 20,000 lack access to internet service with a download speed of 4 megabits per second, which is too slow for many modern-day internet applications. But filling in those last-mile addresses won't come cheaply. Between 2016 and 2017, the State Department of Public Service handed out more than $1 million in grants to telecom companies such as Fairpoint, now known as Consolidated Communications, and EC Fiber for broadband expansion to underserved communities, which include places like Peru, Vermont. The issue arose again in this past fall's governor election, where Christine Hallquist, who lost to incumbent Phil Scott, pushed for having electric utilities be responsible for a statewide fiber network. Under her plan, the internet service providers would have paid to use the network and developed various packages for customers. But Hallquist didn't explain how the system would be paid for, and Phil Scott avoided making universal broadband access a campaign pledge.
Yeah, my name is Brett Long. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Economic Development for the state. And part of the reason I'm here today is that we're looking at the possibility of creating funding through VITA, the essentially state's economic development bank, to help organizations. I think the governor agrees with Laura that we've undertaken some big projects that haven't worked out that well, and maybe what we should be doing is focusing on the smaller projects like EC Fiber and Newbury and stuff like that that are getting a little bit of traction. But how can we help those organizations, those smaller organizations, to go from zero to I'm a finance person, bankability, basically either being able to raise money from a bank or from bond markets. So
it can sometimes seem like a chicken and egg dilemma. Without such access, economic development is hard and may well soon be impossible, but the obstacles to getting such access in the first place can also be difficult. Rob Brooks of Leverett, Massachusetts, was one of the speakers at the conference who discussed his experiences in attempting to work with bringing more broadband to his small town.
Well, yeah, as a town official of a town that's gone through this process, what do you see as the biggest challenges for small towns and communities here in Vermont to upgrade their whole broadband and internet status?
Two big fundamental problems. The first is actual internet connectivity. Is there a way to get to the internet? If you're in a somewhat rural community that's off the beaten path and there's no fiber nearby, just building a path to the internet will be a substantial issue. So that'd be the first problem to solve. The second one is finances. Who's going to pay for it? There's many different ways. In my town, in Leverett, Massachusetts, we chose to tax ourselves to build the network. So the network was built on the backs of the taxpayers. But what that means is we're not using a revenue-based bond that would be reliant on subscriber fees. So the network can't collapse. The network will never be taken over. We've built the network, and so the network, once the network is up and running, we just need to charge enough to actually maintain the network, for future use. But we don't need to actually fund the build of the network. If you look around the nation, most of the municipal networks that have failed were based on revenue bonds. And so when we began our project, we figured if we can't get the citizens to vote to tax themselves, we're not going to do it. We felt that was the safest way. And as it turns out, we had two votes in Leverett. One was a 90% yes, the other was an 84% yes. So the citizens in our town voted overwhelmingly to tax themselves.
So there is an alternative then to the seed money approach from the state or federal government, because that always seems to be what it comes down to for a lot of people I've talked to, is that we need to have that initial money to come in from someplace other than the municipality to get this thing up and running.
Well, we also were the beneficiary of some of that money. In Massachusetts, the middle mile was funded ultimately by the federal government, filtered through an entity in Massachusetts. So without the middle mile in Massachusetts, we wouldn't have our network. Also, the state funded a $50,000 feasibility study in Leverett to see, for us to figure out how much would the network cost. Other than those, yes, we did fund it ourselves, but really without the leveraging technology of the middle mile and the initial seed money from the state to fund the feasibility study, it would have been difficult to do. So it really is very difficult to do without any sort of external funding.
Representative Laura Sibilia, who represents the towns of Dover, Reedsboro, Searsburg, Somerset, Stamford, Wardsboro, and Whitingham in the state legislature, and who also works with the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, said the buck starts with the localities.
I think what we need to have happen is have more communities, more groups feel empowered to take on this challenge, and that's really what we're trying to do here today. Is help folks feel like it's on you. You are the person that is going to solve this, and we want to help provide tools, resources, advocacy to help you get there. I think there is a sense of urgency, but I am not sure that we have really established that nobody is coming to save you. And in southern Vermont, we know that this is a critical issue, particularly when we look at our economic development. Home sales, business startups, trying to recruit folks here to work with our existing employers. Folks have an expectation of being connected. So we're leaving some communities behind. We know that folks are anxious to get moving, and so it's I think for us being able to empower communities is one of our priorities here.
For the GNet TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.